Donald Trump's return to the presidency in 2024 reflects a complex mix of economic, cultural, and political factors. His campaign strategy capitalized on widespread dissatisfaction with the status quo and successfully mobilized voters across diverse demographic groups. Not only did he win a pretty overwhelming victory in the Electoral College, but he also looks set to win the popular vote, the first Republican candidate to do so since George Bush in 2004. Republicans also appear poised to win a governing trifecta. There are obviously loads of reasons for Trump's victory. As we see it, the two biggest reasons might be his massive overperformance with minorities and the economy. In short, while we don't have the full results yet, there's a fair bit of provisional evidence, based on districts where Trump performed well and their ethnic composition, that Trump's victory was driven by a remarkable performance among minority voters, who have traditionally broken for the Democrats. Now, this wasn't a total surprise. While Kamala Harris improved on Biden's numbers, Trump had been making gains in the polls with minorities, especially Hispanic and Arab Americans. However, the magnitude of Trump's success has come as a surprise. According to NBC, for instance, in Wisconsin, Trump won 20% of the black vote, compared to just 8% in 2020. In Pennsylvania, he won 40% of the Hispanic vote, up from an already unprecedented 30% in 2020. All in all, NBC is currently predicting that Trump will win a third of all minority voters across the U.S., which would be the best performance for a Republican ever. For context, pre-election polls showed that Republicans hadn't won more than 25% of the non-white vote since 1964. The TLDR is that different ethnic groups have their own specific reasons. Arab Americans, for instance, generally disapprove of Biden's Gaza policy, while young black voters don't have the same loyalty to the Democrats as their older peers. The overarching reason, though, seems to be that minorities generally hold more socially conservative views than their voting patterns suggest, and much more conservative views than their white progressive peers. This is a relatively new phenomenon. In the 2000s, for example, Democrats and their minority base had relatively aligned views on issues like immigration. But over the past decade, white Democrats and the Democratic Party as a whole have become increasingly pro-immigration, while non-white voters have broadly maintained their views, creating an ideological gap between the party and its minority base. Similarly, while white Democrats increasingly identify as progressives, non-white voters generally identify as moderates, as they always have. Non-white voters are also significantly less likely than white progressives to agree with left-coded statements like, "Racism is built into American society." They are more likely to agree with right-coded statements such as, "The government should increase border security and enforcement," and "America is the greatest country in the world." As this ideological gap has widened, fewer non-white voters identify as Democrats, and more have shifted toward the Republicans. According to John Byrne Murdoch of the Financial Times, this shift has been accelerated by the decline of a taboo among minorities against voting Republican. This has allowed conservative minorities, who previously voted Democrat despite holding socially conservative views, to align their vote choice with their ideology. But it's not just about the minority vote. Let's move on to the second big reason Trump won, the economy. According to CNN's exit poll, the economy was the second most important issue to voters in this election, and presumably the most important issue for Trump voters. Democracy was cited as the most important issue overall, likely by Harris voters. One of the big questions in this election was whether voters would credit Biden for his economic record. Judging by the macro numbers, America's economy has been pretty incredible by international standards. The U.S. suffered a smaller inflationary spike than peer economies during 2022 and 2023. American GDP growth has outpaced nearly every other large economy. The Federal Reserve managed to achieve a so-called soft landing, successfully adjusting interest rates to bring down inflation without triggering a recession. Biden's industrial policies, including the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act, are also generally considered successes, though the number of jobs created has been somewhat underwhelming. Nonetheless, the headline story is this: by international standards, the American economy is doing great. Europeans, for example, would kill for even a fraction of America's GDP or productivity growth. However, despite this, polls consistently showed that Americans weren't happy with Biden and Harris's economic record. Largely, this comes down to inflation. Biden and Harris hoped that, as inflation fell, Democrats could draw attention to America's economic overperformance. But this just hasn't worked. Voters don't approve of Biden and Harris's handling of the economy and generally feel better about Trump's economic record from his first term. This is part of a global trend. Governments in power during the inflationary spike of 2022 to 2023 have struggled in the polls, and many have been voted out of office in recent elections. Voters care most about anti-core inflation, that is, food and fuel inflation, because it directly affects their day-to-day lives. These costs have gone up drastically worldwide, not just in the US. Biden's woes have been exacerbated by media polarization in America. Democrats and Republicans have almost completely different media diets, leading to radically different perceptions of the economy. In other countries, voters across political groups generally agree on the state of the economy. In Germany, for instance, while far-right AfD voters are more pessimistic, perceptions of the economy move in tandem across voter groups. In the US, however, partisanship drives perceptions. Republicans think the economy is bad when Democrats are in power and vice versa. This polarization means Biden and Harris would likely have struggled to convince Republicans the economy was doing well, even without the inflationary crisis. Despite Trump's resounding victory, there's still much more to follow in this election cycle. With the drama of the US election far from over, staying informed is crucial. And that's the latest on today's top stories. What are your thoughts? If you'd like to dive deeper into any of these topics or explore related issues, feel free to leave a comment. Thank you for tuning in and spending your time with us. Stay informed, stay curious, and we'll see you next time. Take care.